Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this brief session, which is labelled as a discussion and debate, which is going to be led by myself, Neal Sumner, and my colleague over here, Patrick Baughan. We're from the LDC, if you don't already know us, and we have put on today's session. So initially this was going to take the form of a debate, but we realised that we just don't have a lot of time to debate. So what I thought might be helpful is to pick up on some of the issues that were raised by our very exciting and I thought worthwhile keynote that we had this morning from Graham Gibbs. And I'm sad to report that I have actually read his Dimensions of Quality document that he produced for the Higher Education Academy a couple of years ago. There's a link for those of you that would be interested in pursuing it there. And what he does in that report is he identifies a whole range of factors that impact on the quality of higher education and in particular the quality of student achievement, the factors that influence student achievement. And what we've done, Patrick and myself, is identified these as the 10 most salient factors that affect student achievement in all higher education institutions. I have to say, one of the impressive things about Professor Gibbs's report is the extent to which it is based on research, on evidence. So this isn't just 10 factors that he's dreamt up. This is factors that have been gathered from studies that have been carried out around the UK. So, and these are in no particular order, but we'll come back to that shortly. So the first of these is departmental funding. And this, of course, touches on some of the others, like the kind of resources that are available, both in terms of staff, laboratory, resources, etc. And it relates to how much funding does the department have and is there any correlation between that and student achievement. Okay? The second, and this is something that I think is of particular interest to us here at City at the moment, is about student selection. And we know that we're pushing up the tariff for students entering the university, and it'll be interesting to see whether in 3 years' time this has a knock-on effect in improved final degrees. And, so is it the quality of the students coming in that really impacts on the quality of the students going out at the other end? A third factor, so we might call those, as Graham does in his report, prior factors or pre-stage factors, okay? Those first two. A third one, rather, is class size. So are you in a class of 20, 50, 200? And we heard quite well from the students who were here this morning that class size to them was a very salient factor in terms of their experience of the university and how well they were able to learn. Now that's clearly linked to the next factor, which is staff-student ratios. And is there a high staff-student ratio, a low staff-student ratio? We know that the university is undergoing a lot of restructuring at the moment. If that's going to have its own impact on staff-student ratios and the extent to which students are able to have contact with a personal tutor, for example. And that, again, is something which our student ambassadors reported on this morning as being particularly important to them. That also links into face-to-face contact hours, and this is the one that the press always like to pick up on in terms of being one of the most important influences on student learning. So do you have 1 hour a week, 3 hours a week, 10 hours a week of face-to-face contact with academic staff? What is it? And we've been led to believe, haven't we, that once the KISS factors become widely understood by the student body, that contact hours will be one of the key indicators that will determine where students choose to go when they apply to university. Sixthly, the one that I thought Graham was particularly keen to emphasize this morning, and that is student time on task. One factoid that I picked out of his Dimensions of Quality report when I read it, which he didn't mention this morning, is that on average, students in the UK spend 0.7 hours out of class work for every 1 hour of in-class work, on average. He mentioned that in Oxford University, they tend to do 11 hours of out-of-class work for every 1 hour of face-to-face contact with their tutors. And indeed, he mentioned the Open University, and that's another institution which has very high student satisfaction scores, incidentally, where students are expected to do a lot of out-of-class work compared to the amount of contact hours that they have. So student time on task, then, would seem to be, certainly in Graham's view, one of the most important influences on student achievement. Number 7 is the frequency and variety of assessment, which was largely the focus of his keynote talk to us today. And he had quite a lot of interesting things to say about that. And I realized that by bundling these two things up, frequency on the one hand and variety on the other, that these are actually two issues, but I've just bundled them together here as one. And it might be that you'll think, well, we should have more frequent assessments, there should be more variety, or you might think, well, there should be less frequent assessments and less variety. But either way, it's the frequency and variety of assessments, I think, which is a factor which influences student achievement. And then following on from that is about the prompt and effective feedback. And I think I did hear that very sharp intake of breath when Graham said this morning that 3-week turnaround times are useless. Anyway, but that's where we are with it. And many of us struggle to do it within 3 weeks, I know. So I don't quite know how we're going to deal with that particular challenge. But prompt and effective feedback, as our students said this morning, is one of the things that really matters to them and certainly influences their level of achievement. So number 9 then is teaching by qualified staff. This is something which is identified in his dimensions of quality report. And by qualified staff, in this context, he means staff who have some teaching qualifications. So in other words, staff who know something about teaching, not staff who are necessarily qualified in their subjects. I'm sure we're all qualified in our subjects to a greater or lesser degree, but that staff who teach in a university ought to have some experience of doing a teaching qualification, and that there is a correlation, according to his research, between staff who have that qualification and improved teaching and student achievement. And then finally, and this is a more nebulous thing, but again, I think it did come out in what Graham had to say today, it's about high expectations of staff and students. So establishing a culture in a department that students are here to work, staff have very high expectations of students, and that is what is expected from the time when students arrive till the time they leave. And I think we all recognize that there are different cultures across different departments, and students do come with various degrees of expectation, various sorts of expectation. So those were the 10 factors that struck me as the most important from reading Graham's report, but also I think he mentioned many of them this morning, and of course he had his own take on which he felt were the most important in terms of influencing student achievement, which I'm sure you will remember, those of you that were here. So what we'd like you to do now, Patrick and I, is to talk to your neighbour about which you think are the most important, or your neighbours, plural, it doesn't have to be just one. And if you haven't got a neighbour, then find one. So talk to your neighbour and try and arrange these in some hierarchy of importance. So what we'd like to do is to get you to discuss and debate which you think are the most important and the least important factors. And then you're going to have the exciting democratic opportunity to vote on these, and we'll be able to establish from the assembled audience what you think are the factors that most influence student achievement. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've probably used a minute. So just to explain, hopefully you've all had a little think about this in your pairs. Whilst you've done it in pairs, we're going to ask you very shortly to vote individually. You should all have one of the PRS handsets. So Neil's just gone on to the next slide. Don't press any buttons yet. We're using the PRS, the personal response system, in a slightly different way from how we normally use it. What we would like you to do is work out, hopefully you've done this already, how you would list these factors in rank order. So for example, if you think that, just to take a random example, if you think that number 7, frequency and variety of assessment, in your own view, is the most important factor that influences student achievement, you would stamp in number 7 first. And then if you thought class size was next most important, you stamp in 3, etc. So you're going to do a rank order. You can rank all of them 1 to 10 in the order that you want to, if you want, or if there's just 4 or 5 of them which you want to put in and you think the others aren't so important, just enter the 4 or 5 that you want to. So you don't have to put in all 10 in the order that you want to, but obviously you can put in all 10 if if you have ordered them all. Okay. The other thing is that just to emphasise that the way you type them in, if you think number 7 is the most important, put in digit 7 first of all, etc. One final point is that for number 10, wherever you rank number 10, you press the number 0 on your keypad rather than 1 and then 0. So all of the numbers as they are except number 10, which you put in as number 0. Okay, so is everybody ready to press the buttons? And in a minute, hopefully, if the technology works, we will get some data.
They started. Excellent. Carry on then.
We'll give you a minute or two to do that. You might want a little bit of reflection time, I don't know.
Yes, do it. One after the other. 7, 3, 6.
I think most people have probably pressed the buttons. Anybody else still working? Okay, we'll give it a little bit longer then.
It's just about a full house, actually.
I think that's probably it, yeah, because it's been at 42 for a minute or two. Okay, now hopefully, when I press the next button, after a short delay, we should get some data. Let's see what happens.
Song contest. Michelle's got to put hers in.
Okay. You've obviously been considering your choices very carefully. Tell me when you're done. It seems to have gone up. Okay. Hooray. It works. So there is the outcome. We did a little test run of this, and we thought that it would probably be fairly close with no overall majority, and that seems to be the case. The numbers are quite closely banded together. But the two most popular, I can't really read it very well from this close distance. It appears to me, if I'm reading it correctly, is it student time on task, which is the most popular?
And face-to-face contact.
Followed very closely, just 1% lower, by face-to-face contact hours. So that's the next most popular. And then indeed, we've got at least 2, which are just 1% down from that, at 11%, and we've got a couple at 10% as well. So let's focus our attention on those top 2. Why did people who voted student time on task vote for that? What made people think that was high priority?
Well, Graham Gibbs told us.
But you should
so that's the right answer, Nigel. That is
Nigel,
the right answer.
Somebody of your stature at the university surely thinks independently. Yes.
It's how students learn.
Yeah.
The more work you do, the more likely you are to succeed. It's as simple as that.
Point up at it.
So like,
Yeah.
it's a left impression in life.
Like your analogy of the gym, where I was in the session that I was in earlier on. You
Yeah, absolutely.
pay to go to a gym, but if you don't use the equipment, you don't get fit.
Your hand actually went up first, so would you like to...
I didn't even vote because I teach on distance courses, so I thought that just excuse the result really. But I said I find that aspect really important as well, but I wouldn't call it student time, I would call it taking responsibility for learning. So it's a slightly broader view.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other? Yeah, we've got some more hands.
I think it's very important to note that these are views from teachers, more or less, if I'm not wrong. As a student, I would think I would contest that outcome because I think teaching by qualified staff is a key factor, because I think the staff have a responsibility even to cause students to appreciate this kind of thing. So remember, when a student comes to the university, they are not exactly aware of what it takes to be in the university.
Okay, good point.
So for me, I think the starting point is a qualified teacher, and most of those are consequences of a qualified teacher. So I am a bit skeptical about
No, it's a good answer. Yeah. Thank you. That's a helpful perspective.
Anyone else like to add some perspectives or views? Also, it's worth pointing out that the very first one, departmental funding, received the lowest response.
Yes, don't let the Vice Chancellor see that slide.
I believe he's probably just outside, actually. He's on his way in.
We'll keep him out until we turn the slide on.
And by the way, I think he probably really is just outside. Yeah. Nigel.
It's also interesting that face-to-face contact hours, which is certainly reasonably closely tied to departmental funding, it was the second highest. It did strike me that 1, 3, 4, and 5 were closely tied to
They are related, yeah, for sure.
From the point about taking responsibility, which I agree with entirely, we thought that the last one, high expectations of staff and students, there's questions in there. Expectations of staff having high expectations of their students, students having high expectations of their staff, and of, there's a four-way thing going on there. But that probably also would lead on to a number of things, including, for instance, student time on tasks.
Yeah, I mean, clearly all of these points are in some ways related, and I wouldn't like to think that we would just pick out one and say, well, this is what we're going to focus on. I think we need to focus across the whole range of these factors, but it's just an interesting exercise to see which we think are the most important in our own professional practice as it is. So, are there any implications for this? I mean, in terms, for example, of program design or curriculum design, if we're thinking about student time on task, picking up again on what Graham was saying this morning, are we designing our curricula to maximize student time on task? Or do we design them in a way that, again, to borrow a phrase that Graham used this morning, allows students to be selectively negligent? Where you don't have to cover all the topics on a syllabus or on a module, and that you can pick and choose the things that you think will come up in the exam.
I think it's worth pointing out as well that the prompt and effective feedback one here, it gets 9%. So whereas students tend to give that, relatively speaking, a very high priority, we've given it a slightly lower priority. I mean, it's probably about average there, although the percentages are so close together that it's difficult to reach any concrete conclusions. One other question, was there anyone here that was actually quite surprised by the way the numbers were distributed? Did anyone kind of have a think before as to what they might look like and have different expectations?
Again, I think it depends on what we mean by student achievement. I've taken student achievement to mean not getting high grades, but improving during the course of learning.
Progression.
That's what I understand by it. Then 2 seems to me to be completely irrelevant. So obviously, either the 8% didn't share my view of that, or interpreted the task.
Yeah. Fair point. Fair point.
Can I just say as well, you said what factors most influence student
a lot of people are opting for face-to-face time around that, and yet the Open University and a lot of distance learning courses like Evelyn, in fact, have extremely high student achievement and student satisfaction, but low face-to-face time.
For me, for our courses, feedback is absolutely crucial. The quality and constructiveness and specificity of the feedback, absolutely crucial, because the learning is to quite a considerable degree in the feedback.
I mean, I think we need to bear in mind as well that this is based on someone else's model, and actually the percentages are very close together, so there's huge percentage differences. Okay. We're running out of time, and we don't want to be responsible for holding up the VC. Any closing comments or observations? I think we need to end, do we? Yeah, we are actually a minute early. Okay, well, I hope you found that a little bit of fun as well as revealing too. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And
give yourself a round of applause, don't you, for taking part.